Okay, so we have been talking in the last 4 verses of chapter 9 of chapter Daniel. We talked about the history of the world, how it was laid out in advance. And I took you verse by verse to show you what God shows us. And right now we're in what we call the interval, where God stopped time for Israel. The church age has started, and when the church is removed, then the Israel's time will begin again, the last 7 years of this age's history. So there has been so much that has gone on. I've been trying to get to church just to tell you about it, because we're not seeing a whole lot about this on the local news. But probably a month or so ago, I talked to y'all about the 83rd Psalm War. And so much has happened. I felt like we needed an update today before I can move on, because we were supposed to talk about the Gog-Magog War, right? In Ezekiel 38. But this had to happen, I believe, first, and it will either lead into, or it will be several years of peace to get Israel in that false state of peacehood before the 83rd or the Ezekiel 38 war will start. And so I want to talk to y'all about Middle East today. We're going to go over all the things that's happened since October 7th, 2023, last year. I believe this war is coming to a close. But prophetic scripture study, there are several reasons why we study prophetic scriptures. And one of those is not to make us fearful. It is to make us prepared and to understand why it's coming and what is going to happen. And so my personal favorite benefit, that's just one of the benefits, but my personal favorite benefit of studying prophetic scripture is because I am now conscious of where the geopolitical world is headed, and a great understanding comes when I see political events unfold and how they are lining up with God's word. And so because of that, I no longer experience fear. I remember a time when one little thing would happen, I think, oh my gosh, World War III's right on us. But I no longer experience fear. But I do experience great sadness, because like in John in Revelation 10:9, John ate of the little book, and it was really sweet in his mouth. It's really exciting to learn all these things. But once you really get a great understanding, it's pretty bitter in the stomach, because you know what's coming upon the world. And so I want to start off with one of my favorite quotes from a Jewish woman who lived through the Holocaust. She was in the incredible horrors of those concentration camps. And she says, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future into the hands of a known God." And I feel like that's where we're at. That was from Tori ten Boom, who has a book out, if you hadn't read it, her exploits and everything about those times and how her faith in Christ got her through, or in God got her through those times. So God has a way of asking us every single day, do you trust me? He asked me that in little things. Just like I was panicking it was Thanksgiving. It was almost December 1st. I hadn't sold all my puppies. I hadn't even sold a tenth of my puppies. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we have 40 puppies on the ground. We've sold, the last one sold Christmas Eve. So God has a way of asking me I just kept telling him, I trust you, God, to bring me the right buyers for the right puppy. They're going to all find great homes. We sold the last one Christmas Eve. And I remember thinking, yep, see, just again, you just ask me every day, do you trust me? So it's the little things in our lives. Do we trust him? But there are some things that we know about the future, because God recorded these future events in his word through his prophets, so that you and I will know the seasons and the times in which we live. And so we know we are living in the latter days of this age. We know the last days of this age will be challenging. Jesus tells us this. The love of many will grow cold. And Paul tells us that many are going to depart from the faith. We know Israel will be gathered back into their homeland. We knew that was going to happen in the latter days. That happened on May 14th, 1948. We know there will be a confederacy of Islamic nations that border Israel who will try to wipe them off the map as a nation. That is Psalm 83 war. I believe this is the war that is happening right now in the Middle East. The Bible also tells us about a war found in Ezekiel 38:39 that we call the Gog-Magog war. And then we know that Armageddon happens, and that of course triggers the second coming of Christ. And this is what will end this present age and start the next 1,000 years, or the millennial kingdom age here on earth. So I want, like I said, to go back and touch, because so much has happened just in the last 2 weeks, but over the past year, that I felt like it was time to update this before I could go on and talk about the Gog-Magog war. The countries that are involved, and if y'all want to grab your Bibles and turn to Psalm 83, I'm not going to read through it because I've read through it so many times with you, but I'm just going to highlight some of the things out of that psalm. The countries that are talked about in this particular psalm is Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. And we should be hearing about this every time we turn on the news, but unfortunately, how many of y'all realize that there is a huge war going on in the Middle East? Huge war going on. It is a 7-front war that is attacking Israel right now as we speak. A confederacy of nations, the 83rd Psalm tells us, will conspire to destroy the nation of Israel. They will be defeated in a mighty way by Israel with the help from God, and this is what the Psalm 83 is all about. This will lead to a false peace, which will lead to another set of nations who will attack Israel for a different reason, not to wipe them off the face of the earth, but they're going to come for booty, for spoil. They're coming for something that Israel has control of. That will be next. Now we're dealing with terrorist Islamic terrorist organizations whose only goal, they don't care what Israel has, they want the Jewish nation gone. It is that everlasting hatred that I talked about between Jew and what we call Arabs here in America, but which are really the Muslim terrorist organizations. 2 different wars with 2 different reasons for those wars happening. You have to read it very carefully to get that understanding. So Israel declared independence in 1948 and once again became a nation after 2,500 years. That was the miracle of all miracles for me in the Bible. A nation who has not existed for 2,500 years, who had dispersed all over the world, comes back and the nation is born again in one day, just as the Bible prophesied. 5 nations that happened on May, I've got 15th. No, I'm sorry. That happened on May 14th, 1948. The very next day, on May 15th, 1948, 5 nations attacked Israel. Why? To prevent the establishment of the Jewish nation. It was Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia, who fought not under their own flag, but under Egypt's flag, but they were still involved in this. Israel miraculously won that war. They won the right to exist as a sovereign nation. Now, Arab countries, now the next big event that happened in their history was what we call the 6-Day War. There were Islamic countries, the Islamic faith came up again, but the Arab armies suffered crippling losses of weaponry and equipment. The 6-Day War, it was a 6-day war that these countries come against Israel and fought against them, and it was Egypt, casualties numbered more than 11,000. Jordan, casualties numbered more than 6,000. Syria lost 1,000 men, and Israel only lost 700
And this was the one where
in that attack. It was a miracle above miracles. And it was 3 countries, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, that attacked.
What?
Go to my ear.
And so
She
the
was
Arab
only
armies
female prime minister in the history of Israel, and she was the one that called their armies and their weaponry stockpiles. And so for a small time, Israel again had a little bit of peace from these countries. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong war. Then we come to what we call the Yom Kippur War in 1973. That was the year after I was born, the Yom Kippur War. And that was Egypt and Syria alone attacked Israel. Saudi Arabia threatened an oil embargo against any nation that helped Israel. And this is when Golda Meir, if I say that, I'm sure I'm slaying those names, called President Nixon and begged him to come and help Israel, because if not, all was lost. And President Nixon, against all odds, sent airplane after airplane after airplane, replenishing their military supplies, and they were dropping them. And Jews still to this day who are living during that time will tell you how it was just almost a gift from God, all those airplanes dropping those supplies down to them. And so they again pushed back Egypt, who invaded Israel, occupied lands in the south through the Sinai Peninsula, and Syria, who led an invasion through the Golan Heights. We hear that all the time in the northern part of Israel. So it was a two-fronted war. And many of you probably remember that oil embargo. Oil in the United States, because we did help, and some of the Western European countries did help Israel, oil quadrupled here. Gas prices went through the roof. I know I have heard my mom and dad talk about how it was so expensive at the pumps to fill your vehicles up with gas. And so and it took us years to get over that. But we were on the right side of the fight. We always stand with Israel. Why? Because those who stand with Israel will be blessed, and those who are against are cursed by God. And I would rather go through a little oil embargo. We all came out of it just fine. Might have been rough at the time, but we all came through it. And again, Israel was outnumbered in manpower and weaponry, and you can read through this. Israel had less than half of most things. 400 troops to their almost 1 million troops. 1,700 to 3,500 tanks. 3,000 armored carriers to their 4,000. 945 artillery units and 440 combat aircraft. And the other side had much more equipment. But Israel, against all odds, won that war. And it took them about 2 weeks to recoup, regather, and get, because it happened on, what is Yom Kippur in Israel? What is that? That's the Day of Atonement. So all these people had went home. They were in their synagogues. They were at home praying. It was a feast day, right? There was no commerce going on that day. Everybody was at home and enjoying Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when these countries attacked. Completely unprepared. They were completely unprepared. And so I'm going to send out today an article written by Golda Meir talking about that miracle that God had given them, who was the prime minister of Israel during this war. And I'm going to send that out, and I want y'all to read it, because it was really touching, because I've never had really warm thoughts about Richard Nixon. Of course, that was before my time. I don't remember Richard Nixon. But in history, you have pictures painted to you in history class. But it changed my perspective a little bit about Mr. Nixon. Of course, that Yom Kippur War with Egypt and Syria losing led to what the Camp David Accords in 1978. It was signed by President Jimmy Carter, who I do remember, the Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem. And like I said, I may be slaying these names. But Egypt regained the Sinai Peninsula that Israel had captured during the Six-Day War. And you have to remember, during the Six-Day War, Israel took back all their lands. They got from the Sinai Peninsula all the way down to the Red Sea, and they took back the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. They had it all. But the world didn't want them to keep it. And so the world, the UN, the United States, all got together and they did a resolution, I think it was Resolution 232, where they decided that Palestine had to have land. So they were trying to come up with that two-state solution where you trade land for peace. And our country brought these people over, the Egyptian president and the Israel Prime Minister Menachem, and they brought them in and they gave them back the Sinai Peninsula that Israel had captured during that war in 1967. Israel received its first formal recognition of trading land for peace from the Arab state of Egypt, laid out the formula for the Palestinian self-governments in the Gaza and West Banks. So the peace agreements was signed on March 26, 1979, shortly after the Camp David Accords meeting happened, and it was trading land for peace. Land for peace. What? What does God tell us about dividing his land? It's his land, and we don't do it. Every time we do it, I told y'all about this book that I've read that has, I think it's like, you cannot imagine the natural disasters we have here in America when we're over trying to, in these peace accords and over in Israel trying to get them to divide their land, this land for peace trade. It is unbelievable what happens during those talks here in America. And so Yom Kippur War happened. Egypt and Israel signed a peace treaty 6 years later on March 26, 1979, which then led to October 26, 1994. This leads to a peace treaty between Jordan and Israel and obligated both countries to prevent their territory being used as a staging ground for military strikes on other countries. So in other words, Jordan has signed a peace treaty back in 1994 that says that like Iran can't come into their country that borders at the Dead Sea to Israel, cannot use their country to invade Israel. And the same thing with Israel. If Lebanon wanted to attack Jordan, it can't use Israel. So their countries can't be used as a staging ground. Normalized diplomatic relations between them in resolving territorial disputes. And the treaty adjusted land and water disputes and provided for broad cooperation in tourism and trade. And so they were the second country to ever recognize Israel as a nation, as a sovereign nation. Now we go many, many years. From 1994, there was skirmishes. You had the spring Arab rising. There was all kinds of little skirmishes that's going on ever since then. But the big thing started happening again under President Trump in 2017 when Jerusalem was recognized by Trump as the capital of Israel. That was a big deal. Then in 2019, he recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Another big deal. That's been in dispute since the beginning of the country. And then, of course, we saw him doing the signing on the White House lawn of the Abraham Accords, where he got United Emirates and, I don't think I have that in there, United Emirates and Bahrain, and then later on Morocco and the Sudan actually signed on to those Abraham Accords saying that they were recognized. So 4 more countries since 2017 has accepted Israel as a sovereign nation. You got to remember, a lot of those countries over there, Iran, Syria, Iraq, all those countries do not even recognize the Jewish nation of Israel. They don't even recognize it as being a nation, which is why they're in such war all the time. So September 15, 2020, we have the Abraham Accords. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because until now, October 7th, 2023, Israel has never had a war. They've always been a defensive army, right? People shoot rockets at them. I told y'all last time we talked about this, it was like whack-a-mole. It'll pop up over here and Israel smacks it down, and they pop up over here and they smack it down. And it's always been a very defensive army. But something happened in 2023 on October 7th when Hamas out of the Gaza Strip invaded Israel. Something happened to Israel. They're no longer a defensive nation. And this is what we're not seeing on the news, is the things that I'm going to talk to you about today. So, the participants, Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. And then we've got Saudi Arabia. Now, I didn't know this until just I don't know where I've been because the news don't tell me the things that I need to know. But have you heard of the Houthis? The Houthis, it's a terrorist organization who is located out of Yemen. Yemen is located below the Saudi Arabia. It's the bottom part of the peninsula. And so I'm wondering if this Saudi Arabia is part of that descendants of the Yemen who's shooting rockets into the Red Sea, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, and also into Israel. And then we know the last two nations, which are Jordan and Egypt, have signed those peace treaties years ago, and those peace treaties has actually withstood this war. They did not enter the war as of yet. Now, I believe this this war that we're talking about, this Psalm 83 war, probably started in 1967. May have started all the way back in 1948. But I believe we are on the cusp of seeing it conclude, and I'll show you why. Israel, for the first time in history, has gone on the offensive. Much has happened in the last year, and even more in the last several weeks. This is why I'm talking to you about this today, which demands a prophetic update on the Psalm 83 war. Next week, I'm going to show you how these events over the last 12 months may be the setup for the Ezekiel 38 war that we're going to talk about next week, the Magog-Magog war. Israel is battling a seven-front war against Iranian-funded terrorist organizations known as Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Hamas attacked Israel October 7th, 2023. They went into Israel, and it set off a chain of events that have been felt throughout the Middle East. While the United Nations have supported Israel's right to exist as a nation, and the United States and other countries, they have only allowed Israel to act as a defensive army when attacked. They frown on any offensive attacks out of Israel. What do? They start sanctioning them. They start, the international court right now, the criminal court, has got an issue for Netanyahu's arrest because of what's going on in Gaza. War crimes. Are you kidding? We've committed more war crimes, our country, than Netanyahu has ever thought of committing. And so they've always kept Israel kind of on a chain. But Israel, in other words, you have to take it, and you can defend yourself when they dish it out, but you're not allowed to dish it back out to them. Okay? And so one who is now becoming, we're seeing a different Israel over the last year, and it's one who is now becoming that exceedingly great army of Ezekiel 38, an army that is offensive. They're going on the offense, and they're striking back. Now, how many of you know that Israel is winning the war over there? In a big, big way. The fall of Syria was massive. October 7th, 2023, Hamas attacks Israel from Gaza. We saw that. They went in, they killed babies, they raped women, they drugged so many people back across the lines, and they're still being held hostages. October 8th, the very next day, Lebanon, their terrorist organization that's in Lebanon named Hezbollah, attacks from Lebanon. So we have two fronts going on now. November 19th, 2023, just a few weeks later, the Houthis out of Yemen enter the war. And April 1st, 2024, Iran launches missiles into Israel along with Iraq. Most people don't know Iraq launched missiles, but they did too. And December 8th, 2024, Syria's existing government collapses. And all this, when you put the pieces together, creates a massively prophetic picture for us to take a look at and compare to this 83 war that we're looking at. So October 7th, I'm going to go through these one by one and explain exactly what's going on and what has happened. And this is, you guys, just a little snapshot of the things that has happened and what is and how everything I believe. I think this war's probably got another couple of months and it's over. And so Hamas terrorists waged the deadliest attack on the Jews since the Holocaust during World War II. They slaughtering babies, committing sexual violence, burning whole families alive, and they took over 240 civilians hostages, including 7 Americans, captive in the terror tunnels of Gaza. You hear about this all the time. President Trump has now written a letter guarantee that if those hostages have not been given back by
January 20th, when he takes office,
the Middle East had a bad day coming. And I think the war has escalated because of that threat. Now, this attack by Hamas from the Gaza Strip has set off that chain reaction over the past year that may forever be remembered as the turning point in the Middle East. We are witnessing the collapse of terrorist organizations that are listed in Psalm 83 that are housed in these countries. October 28, 2023, Israel invaded Gaza. They invaded us, or invaded Israel. Israel turned around and invaded them. And when they did, they displaced over 100,000 have been displaced out of their homes. On July 2nd, 2024, now I'm going to slay these names, so bear with me. But Ismail Haniyeh, the deputy chairman of Hamas, was assassinated in Iran while attending the inauguration ceremony of the now president of Iran, or Iran, however you will say it, Iran. And October 16th, 2024, Israel killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. I mean, I'm telling you, I know I'm slaying those Middle Eastern names. So 2 of Hamas's main leaders have been taken out in the last year. Now, we're going to see more before it's over with. Gaza has been under siege since Israel's invasion. No one knows a true casualty count, but suspected over 500,000 have died to date, along with them being lack of water, lack of food, the lack of supplies going in. I would say that this number will be much, much higher before it's over, because you're going to have war, you got pestilence, you got disease coming in, sicknesses, they don't have medicines coming in. And it's all because they housed a terrorist organization. And you have to remember, these are the ones that call themselves the Palestinians. Who are the Palestinians? Those were the ones that were descendants of Amalek. Amalek, they have always had the agenda, going back to ancient biblical times, of genociding the Jewish nation. I gave you an example of King Saul. God told King Saul, you kill every man, woman, and child. You don't let nobody live. And he would not do it. That's why Saul fell as the first king of Israel, and David was risen up. Now, one of these King Amalek's descendants was Haman. Who was Haman in the Old Testament? That's right. He's the one in the Persian Empire who wanted to hang all the Jewish people in the days of Esther. Remember, and Esther was raised up for a time such as this to save her people. That is who Haman is. And so these people's agenda from the very beginning of time have always been to genocide the Jews, wipe them off the map. Okay? Now, I want you to know that my heart bleeds for the innocent people over there. It does. It bleeds for those who have nothing to do with this terrorist organization. They are caught. It would just be like some terrorist organization living here in Manchester, and all of us have nothing to do with it. And war comes to wipe them out, and it's going to take some of us too. It's just the way it happens. And anyway, it is terribly a terrible, terrible situation. But the Bible said it was going to happen, and I have to trust. God asks me every day, do you trust me? Sometimes it's hard. You don't understand. We don't see the big picture sometimes. So much of Gaza's buildings, infrastructure, much of it has been destroyed, and that place, which is a dot, a speck on the map, is basically lying in ruins. And no one knows yet the count of the casualties. You hear on the news a lot about this. The International Criminal Court has accused Netanyahu of war crimes. They've got an arrest out. There's several countries say that if Netanyahu steps foot on their land, they will turn him over to the ICC to prosecute, Okay? Not saying he hasn't. I'm just saying the Bible told us this was going to happen. There's been a lot more leaders do a lot more horrible things to their own people, Turkey being one of them. I mean, they went after the Kurds and almost genocided them. They're having to take refuge of all places in Syria, who's been in a civil war for the last 13 years, and their country's demolished. And so we'll talk more about that again, but I'm just saying, you don't ever hear the courts talk about any other country. Look at what's going on in China against the Christians. Look what's going on in Russia against Ukraine. None of them have been charged with war crimes. It's always and only Israel. Hezbollah. Let's take a look at Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we know a little bit about Gaza. We don't know a whole lot yet because the truth has not come out. It will be years before I think we find out the real truth of how bad it is. But Hezbollah in Lebanon, the day after Hamas in Gaza attacked Israel and drug all the hostages back and burnt, you saw it all over the news, okay? Lebanon entered the war, and I say Lebanon, not the country, but Hezbollah, the terrorist organization who has set up camp there. They started firing rockets into Israel, and they have continued to fire rockets into Israel every day since this war began. On January 2nd of 2024, Hamas's deputy leader, Salah al-Aruri, was killed by a drone strike from Israel in Beirut, the capital city of Lebanon. So there is another Hamas. 3 Hamas leaders have been taken out. On January 8th, 2024 of this year, Israel kills top Hezbollah commander Wissam Tawil in a strike in the south of Lebanon. And then on July 30th, 2024, Israel kills Fouad Shukr, a senior commander who helped Hezbollah expand from a Lebanese civil war militia to a major force in the Middle East. So not only has Israel been targeting Hamas commanders and leaders in that organization, they are taking out Hezbollah's leaders and prime ministers and stuff in their organization. September 17th, 2024, we had Operation Grim Beeper that Israel conducted. Thousands of beepers and handheld walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah exploded simultaneously in 2 separate events across Lebanon and Syria. Lebanon and Syria have the Hezbollah, the organization Hezbollah was in Lebanon and Syria in an Israeli attack. It killed 42 people, including 12 civilians. It injured 1,500 Hezbollah fighters and 4,000 civilians. These victims had injuries including losing fingers, hands, and eyes, as well as brain shrapnel. The incident was described as Hezbollah's biggest security breach since the start of the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict in October of 2023 last year. I thought it was a brilliant strategy. It's brilliant. But what happened was Israel put out the word that they were tracking Hezbollah on their cell phones. And so the leaders say, hey, we're not going to use cell phones anymore. We're going to order these beepers and these handheld walkie-talkies so they can't be surveilled. They're analog instead of digital, right? Well, in the process, Israel had put these little microchip detonating things in these things and waited for the perfect time to set all of them off, killing many and injuring lots more. It was detrimental to that organization. And so it blinded many. They lost fingers. They lost hands. Unfortunately, there were civilians also injured in this, but it was an effective tool. So it was called Operation Grim Beeper. So September 27th, 2024, Israel kills Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who led the group through the decade of conflicts with Israel in an airstrike in Beirut again. October 1st, 2024, Israeli military begins limiting localized and targeted ground raids along the southern Lebanon border with Israel. And they tell residents, get out, you need to evacuate, because they went in a ground attack. And on October 4th, 3 days later, Israel kills prominent Hezbollah official Hisham Safadine, the presumed successor of the Nasrallah, in an airstrike. October 8th, Prime Minister Netanyahu urges the Lebanese people to overthrow Hezbollah or risk the destruction and suffering like they have seen in Gaza. And so now we are seeing in Lebanon, Hezbollah is falling apart. Syria's collapse of their government was the final straw, because when you look at a map that I'm going to show you here in a little bit, you will see Lebanon is cut off from all the rest of the Muslim nations. The only route in is through Syria. Now that Iran's Assad's, who was in cahoots with Russia and Iran, has fallen. He's actually seeking refuge now and got asylum in Moscow that night that it fell. There's no longer that highway to refund and to reman Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so what's there is trapped, and the Israeli army is going in and they are decimating the war stockpiles of weaponry. They're taking out the men. I mean, it's over in Lebanon. It'll be a few more months before we see the complete end to some of this, but I do believe that war is coming to an end on that front. And because of what Netanyahu said, the people have turned against Hezbollah, because Hezbollah told them that they were going to be their protectors, that if there was an attack, they would rebuild their businesses and their villages and be there for them. Now that Hezbollah has fallen and they can't get those supplies in, the people realize, I mean, I saw an interview with the Lebanese, and he is furious because his whole livelihood has been destroyed because of this Hezbollah organization, who now can't carry out the promises that they promised these people. And the Lebanese, who have been trying to vote a good president in from the people, because you got to remember, these organizations are just like I said, if it was an organization in Manchester and all of us are out here and there's not much you can do about it, and they come in and take war, now the people have got the opportunity to rise up and put a president who is more democratic, which was what was there before. Lebanon used to be a beautiful country. Beautiful. On the Mediterranean Sea, it was a beautiful country until these terrorist organizations came in and started promising the people the world, and they destroyed it. They destroyed their country. And now they can't rebuild and do it anymore. They don't have the funds. And so Hezbollah in Lebanon, Lebanese civilians promised protection. I just went over that. Now that the Syria's government has fallen, which was the pathway from Iran to Lebanon, there are no leaders, troops, nor money to help the civilians. This has led the civilians to turn against Hezbollah, and now the opportunity for a new president to be elected has presented itself to the nation of Lebanon. Hezbollah has fired over 12,400 rockets over the last year into Israel, displacing over 60,000 Israelis from their homes. So don't think this war, you hear all the bad things about Israel being genocidal and inhumanitarian and all this kind of stuff. It's both ways. They're at war. It's a war. Houthis in Yemen. I'm going to touch on this for a few minutes to kind of get you pulled up to speed, because the Houthis in Yemen, and to me, is the most important part, maybe the most important part of this war for America. Okay? Their slogan is "Death to America, death to Israel, curse the Jews, and victory to Islam." That is their slogan on their flag. Tells you what kind of people they are, right? November 19th, 2023, the Houthis launched attacks using drones, missiles, and small boats on commercial vessels and naval warships in the Red Sea, one of the world's most important waterways for international commerce. On January 11th, the United States, United Kingdoms, Australia, Bahrain, and the Netherlands mobilized Operation Poseidon Archer, which conducted offensive operations to degrade Houthi military capabilities by launching more than 10 airstrikes on Houthi missile, radar, and storage facilities. In other words, they're trying to take out the stockpiles of weaponry in an effort to keep the flow of international commerce in the Red Sea open. Now, this Red Sea incident was not the first. Every single day, because I went back and looked at the timeline, it's almost every day that the Houthis is firing another missile at oil tankers, any ship that looks like it's going to Israel. Even a Russian ship was hit the other day, a Russian oil tanker, which Russia's kind of funding the war, right? On the other side. We're funding it on one side, they're funding it on the other side. And so the Houthis, now they've got these big missiles that they're actually shooting all the way into Israel. Guys, that is a long way. it has to go over the whole country of Saudi Arabia to get into Israel. But they've done it. But most of their missiles are not having any success. You've got several nations out there that are stopping these missiles before they ever hit. On February 24th of this year, United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Bahrain, now Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, and New Zealand have stepped in with military capabilities, and they're striking back 18 Houthi targets in 8 locations in Yemen. The strikes targeted weapons storage facilities, drones, air defense systems, radars, and helicopters. This place in Yemen, the Houthis, is the last front. The rest of them are fallen. Yemen is the last one, and they're all in. They're not backing down. Since October 2023, the Houthis have launched in an estimated 200 missiles and 170 drones at Israel, in addition to the launches against commercial and naval ships in the Red Sea every single day. They tried to blockade that Suez Canal, and America, and you saw the countries, had to go over and say, no, we're not stopping international trade for this Middle Eastern war. And so that's how America has gotten involved. There's been several Navy SEALs, Americans that have died in this war. They're hijacking ships, and then of course our people are having to go in and fight against that. And so that is still ongoing. Like I said, it's the last front. Israel launched missile attacks this last week and hit their port, their major airport, who had the big WHO official, the World Health Organization official there, ports, and what was the other thing? The ports, the airport, and there was another big institution. So they're bombing and trying to get them shut down. But like I said, I believe this is the last front that we're going to see. Now Iran launches. Israel bombed an Iranian consulate complex in Damascus, killing multiple senior Iranian officials. Because of that, Iran attacks Israel. For the first time in modern history, they sent more than 330 drones and missiles were launched into Israel. On April 19th, Israel retaliates against Iran, hitting some of their, military sites. October 1st, 2024, Iran attacks Israel for a second time when they took out a lot of those Hezbollah and Hamas officials. Iran launched, and I watched this one live, Iran launched between 180 and 200 missiles against Israeli civilian populated areas. They weren't going after targets, military targets. No, they were going after the civilians. So Israel retaliated against the Iran by conducting precision airstrikes against multiple military targets across Iran. And they were very successful in taking out military airlines, some of their missile facilities, although they did not attack that nuclear facility because it still has a plan in the Gog-Magog war. December 8th, 2024, Assad, we're going to talk about Syria. Over 50 years, this family has ruled Syria. 13-year regime collapses. The new regime, I can't even say it, I call it HTS. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, is in control as of December 8th. Turkey is the principal backer of this new regime. Okay, I want y'all to remember that, Turkey. What have I always told you to watch? Who do you got to watch for end-time events? All the countries was there except for one. It was Turkey. Turkey just raised his head. So Turkey is the principal backer of this new regime. HTS will expand Turkey's influence into the Middle East, which is a principal player in the Ezekiel 38 war. Rumor is that Russia is now leaving Syria. They're withdrawing their troops from the Syria. They have a port. See, the whole thing about Russia is they don't have a port on the Mediterranean, right? So they need a port on the Mediterranean. So they're withdrawing their troops from Syria to relocate where? Libya, which both Russia and Libya are also principal players in the Ezekiel 38 war. Israel, within 72 hours of this regime falling, is reported to have destroyed 85% of Syria's military stockpiles and weaponry because they don't want the new regime or any other terrorist organization to come and take everything that Iran has stockpiled into Syria and use it against them. And so they're going for 100%. This was 72 hours later, they'd already wiped out 85%, but they said they're going for 100%. It will take years for Syria to recover. So what's the big picture of this? Is it almost over? Many believe that the noose that Iran has so carefully built around Israel, you had Syria, Iraq, you have Lebanon, you had Gaza, you had Egypt, Sudan, and the Saudi Arabia or Yemen. I mean, they just had a noose. It was just a circle around Israel. All these attacks, carefully built and financed over the last decades through terrorist organizations around Israel, may be in its final stages of collapse. Maybe just for a few more months before Israel finds victory over its enemies listed in the Psalm 83. There's no more money. The stockpiles and weaponry are being destroyed. The Hezbollah, the leaders, have been destroyed. I mean, in Gaza, if there's one Hamas soldier left, it would surprise me before it's over. I mean, they're going in and picking them off one at a time. After this war, the nations involved will be focused on rebuilding their own countries, their own governments, and their own militaries, and too busy to be worried about taking Israel off the map, which will leave Israel in peace for many years. After that Yom Kippur War, we didn't have another war. I mean, that was in 73? We didn't have another war. I mean, we've had skirmishes, but not another war like this until last year. Think about how long that's been. And the reason why is because the same thing happened back then to wipe all their stockpiles, their governments fell. And so it took years for them to get back to this point where they could have another war. And so I'm wondering, because this is all prophetic, you just have to wonder, will Israel go after the last regime, which is in Iran? There is a terrorist organization that just controls 20% of their population. The 80% doesn't want anything to do with that terrorist organization that's been supplying all this and kind of the head of the snake deal here. But we know that Iran will be in cahoots with Russia, Turkey, and all the ones that's in the Gog-Magog war. And so the question is now, will Israel go in and take care of that regime so the Persian people can come back up? Because here's the problem with Iran. You got 20% of the population that's this terrorist organization people, right? 80% aren't. They have a police station in every town. So anytime there is an uprising to complain or protest about the terrorist or the present government, this police force that is the terrorist organization there comes out and they shoot them. I mean, it's like they call the police on them and they shoot them. I mean, it's like it's a horrible thing. It's in every city. So will Israel go in and take care of that so that the 80% can come back up? The Persian people, I mean, they're Persian. The Shah's son lives here in America. The old monarchy, the Persians. There's a huge Persian population out in California. The Persians, remember, Persia was King Cyrus. He's the one that let the Jews go back home to rebuild the temple. They're not a bad people. It's just these terrorist organizations have taken foothold. And the problem is they can't overthrow them because the 20% has guns and the 80% are weaponless. This is why America, I believe, is still standing with some semblance of order, law and order, is because our civilian population still owns weaponry. You ever take our weapons away, they can do anything they want to you. It was not for us to protect ourselves against foreign. It was to protect ourselves from our own government. All right, so which will leave Israel in peace for many years? Will Israel go after that terrorist regime in Iran? Time will tell. Could this be the false peace with all these countries and terrorist organizations fallen and their governments having to be rebuilt, their countries to be rebuilt? Could that be the false peace that Israel falls under when they're hit with the surprise attack from Ezekiel 38? Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings desired to see what you see and did not see it. Jesus told that in Luke 10, 23 and 24. We are living in the most prophetic times since Jesus' first coming. He who testifies to these things says, surely I am coming quickly. Amen. Even so, Lord Jesus, come. Next time, we will tackle the Gog-Magog war. What are the prerequisites for it to start? One of those is that Israel will be living in the land in peace without walls. They're not doing that just yet, but I think we're on the verge of that happening. All right, with that, Brother Mark, will you close us out with a word of prayer, please?